But since coming to Iowa, I love the place because it's a great town. I don't know how many people you know about Mayo Clinic Rochester, but it's a number one hospital in the world. But one thing which I came to Iowa, I realized because of being a college town, it's a great place to live, and there are lots of activity in the town. Apart from my like the city, what I learned is that university is very collaborative, and I think Maureen can attest to that fact that you can walk to other people in your department or outside the department or outside the college, and you can work closely with them. And I think one reason is that in university, I found, at least in Iowa, people are very comfortable of what they are doing. There is no competition between different PI to do better than other because everybody is doing well. And my lab especially is focused on understanding role of gut microbiome in regulating immune system because I'm an immunologist by training. So most of my study is trying to understand that how these trillions of bugs, which is bugging our system, play a role in our well-being. And so that's what we do. And we work with human patient sample, we work with animal models, as well as we have cell culture and bacteria. So I think we do all facets of different research. And I have undergrad, so we call it guppies. Kevin can tell you about that because we have to teach them how to swim. And then we have grad students. So right now I have five, one master and four graduate student. And then I have a postdoctoral fellow, three of three of them, and one of them will be moving out because he got a job in industry. And then I have a research scientist. So that's how my lab is set up. I also run a microbiome core. And I think that's for it because I can talk about a lot, but then I think most probably we want to answer the question, a specific question you have about lab. Does that cover it, Gavin? Or
Yeah, that was great. Thank
yeah,
you.
over to you, Marin.
So I am an evolutionary biologist. I have a PhD from Indiana University that I've completed in 2004, and then I did several postdocs in a couple of years. I did a 2-year postdoc and then two short postdocs. One was to get more experience in teaching primarily, and another, so I did that at a small school in St. Paul, Minnesota. So Ashu, it sounds like we both have connections in Minnesota. I actually grew up in Minneapolis and I love Minnesota. I also love Iowa City, and I did another postdoc at the University of Minnesota and then came down here in 2008, and I've been here ever since. I agree with Ashu that this is a great town. It's friendly, collaborative. I like that the campus is small enough that you can physically uh, collaborate very easily. Like you can very readily walk over. I could probably walk over to Ashu's lab from my lab in what, 15
Yeah.
minutes. You know, I think that that physical proximity matters. And I think it's actually one of the advantages of our campus is that it's small enough and very friendly that people can really genuinely connect across disciplines. Um, I use primarily a little snail from New Zealand to try to identify the costs and benefits of sexual reproduction, and which are which is a huge open question in evolutionary biology. It's one that Darwin talked about in his books and couldn't answer. And subsequent biologists have all, we've made headway, but we still don't understand why it is that organisms engage in this very convoluted, costly, weird process to make offspring with another individual that only has half their genome when clonal reproduction is so much more simple and much less costly. So I focus on that using this little New Zealand snail simply because it's very rare for an animal to come in either sexual or asexual forms that you can actually compare. And this is exactly what we have in my snails. In my lab, as Wad can speak about, we also do, so people do all sorts of different projects related to sex. They also do some other things that are quite different. We have some people working on anesthesia in snails. We have people working on tissue regeneration. We have people working on sleeping behavior. We have people doing some ecotoxicology work. These snails are very sensitive to water pollutants. And we also do a lot of science outreach. So we go out to the community. We design activities that we do often with kids, and that's also a lot of fun and very meaningful. So I think I have 4 graduate students, 1 postdoc, I guess very similar to Ashu. Probably something like 15 undergrads in the lab. And
Wow.
it's easier for us to get undergrads, on our side of the river as
Mhm.
well. And it's a fun, dynamic place, I think. But we can let Wad tell us what it's really like to work in our lab. But I think it's a nice place with a really good team-oriented culture.
Okay, I can definitely speak about the Neiman Lab. So I was actually doing some research over the summer with our PhD student. Her name's Briante. She specifically studies phosphorus levels in lakes in lakes and in the snails that we sampled from New Zealand a couple years back. I was studying specifically 12 different lake samples that they had previously collected, and I was essentially going through each of the lakes and seeing how much phosphorus was available in these lakes and essentially taking those numbers and comparing them to how many diploid snails, tetraploid, and diploid, tetraploid, and text. Okay, there's a
Triploid.
lot of
The two,
there's a
three
lot of
snails with 2, 3, or 4 genome copies. We're interested
Thank
in
you.
the environmental determinants or factors that might influence why some snails might have more genome copies than others. So imagine if in humans, some of us were diploid, some were triploid, some were tetraploid, and we're all walking around together interacting, and we don't know why it is that some people have more genomes than others. This is what's happening with these snails.
Mhm. Yeah, it was pretty interesting, especially once I learned about how phosphorus is like it's very limited in nature. So it's like how over time is this going to affect the populations of these snails and how these snails get their food, since the phosphorus and the algae that they eat from these lakes is what gives them sustenance. And it was very interesting. I feel like I learned a lot, especially when I presented at the surf presentation. So it was very exciting. I feel like it was a very fulfilling experience and I learned a lot. Gavin, do you want to talk and then we can go to Moesha?
Yeah, sure. So the work I primarily helped on is looking at specific bacteria and their interactions in like a germ-free mouse model or a mouse model with Lecking bacteria. And then from that, we've looked at the severity of MS. If you guys don't know what MS is, it's a demyelinating disorder. So it essentially affects your central nervous system and causes a lot of problems. Um, and I was able to present this research this summer at the immunology retreat, and I've learned a lot of techniques and a lot of bacteria names. And just it's a lot. It's been really fulfilling and really cool.
Cool. My name's Moesha. My PI is not here today, but I'm actually in a psych lab, so a little bit different from Wad and Gavin, who are in more like a chem-based or wet lab. So in my psych lab, we focus on how people respond to different stimulants in front of them. We look at the major question of how, people can be in the same environment but have very different responses to that environment. For example, if there's like a water bottle in front of you, you are most likely going to pick it up and drink it, or you might decide you're not thirsty and just leave it there. So those are 2 different responses to the same environment and same stimulus. So we just basically look at how our brain is able to decide what to do and how we switch between different tasks based off of our goal. And I recently started my own thesis in my lab, basically looking at how different tasks can be before our task switch, or like the time it takes for our brain to decide between tasks gets longer. So just a little bit different, but I really enjoy it. So
Okay, should we move on to questions? Does anybody have any questions? You can put it in the chat for any of the PIs or myself or Moesha or Wad.
I think I'll start with some that people already sent in. So the first one is a very like general question. It's just how applicable is grad school or how applicable is research for grad school in general?
Maureen, you want to answer first?
Sure. It's super, super relevant and important. think having a research experience is important to you as a student from the perspective of helping you learn about what scientific research involves, what it's about, whether you like it. It's not necessarily a good fit for everybody. And I think so you'll learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn a lot of, you'll have the opportunity to, I think, push yourself in ways that are good just for growth and development. Like, as I'm guessing anyone who's been involved in research can attest to, things go wrong, it's boring, you have to troubleshoot, you have to be creative. I think there's all sorts of things that are good for you that, you might be thinking, I'm doing this narrow science thing, but you're really having a good opportunity for growth. And then when it comes to actually like applying for grad school, having that research experience is really good in terms of showing the people that you're connecting to with respect to the application, that you know what you're getting into, you have experience, you like it, you have some proficiency in it, and that you're more likely to be able to succeed. I mean, the reason why the admissions programs, they don't let everybody in is they actually want you to succeed. And so they're looking for people that they think are more likely to succeed, and having that experience and having done well in it and enjoying it is a positive predictor of success. And the University of Iowa is such a great place to get that experience because there's a lot of opportunities with really nice supportive mentors.
So I think Maureen covered everything, and I can give my take on it based on, because I chair admission committee for graduate program in immunology, and I have been part of molecular medicine in last 8 years in different capacity. And one thing is the best measure, like when we go through application, now that GRE score, lots of programs don't do it. So you want to find something which you can compare all students. GRE is not the best measure. I mean, as long as you have a respectable GRE, it's more than 3.6, it's good. But what come as a good measure of how you are, how good fit for your graduate program is letter from your research mentors. Because those were basically help you go up the ladder in the process, like you call for interview. And those experiences you get through because, again, like Maureen mentioned, are you fit for graduate school? So if you have done these undergraduate research, most probably your supervisor or mentor have seen, and they can give you, and you will most probably, if you like research and then only you're applying to graduate program, you will get a letter from your mentor to support what you are saying. So in that way, I think not only it helps you decide is a graduate program for you, because lots of people have come to my lab that they want to go to med school or MD PhD program, and then they decide, no, I think I want to remain in PhD program. So then also it helps you narrow down your focus. Okay, what you love, and you know that nothing works in life better than motivation, your self-motivation. Because unless you are motivated to do something, it doesn't work out. Just because your parents said or somebody else said you are a good scientist, I don't think it work out later in life. So I think, undergraduate research is important if you want to go to a good graduate school. And it is not that we don't take people who don't have undergraduate research experience, but then you need to prove it more. You need to have more on your CV to prove. But if you have a undergraduate research experience, it helps you get that over that threshold. Does it make sense?
There's a question in the chat from Anna that is, how do you know what type of lab is best for you? And do you just go based off of your interests?
I think everything in life is that you should shortlist some of them. And then like your college, when you apply for college, you shortlist, and then you got top 5, bottom 5, your safe places. And you should visit the lab and talk to people in that, because don't just go on based on, because whatever might have worked for one student in lab, because everybody is different. Everybody is a different individual. And if you are in Iowa, like Maureen said, you can just walk 10 minutes to any places in there. So it is best to shortlist some of the lab based on whatever criteria you have and go talk to lab PI and lab people. I think that's your best way instead of just being on a paper or in computer, like what worked best for me.
I would agree with that. I think that just as important as your interests, which by the way will often change as you actually do research and learn what particular scientific area research is actually like. It's often different than you imagine. But just as important as the lab culture. And you're not going to know that until you actually take part in a lab. And that is something that just requires you to experience it. And different lab cultures fit different people, differently. So my lab, I think, is a place where it's team oriented, it's collaborative, it's pretty friendly. Somebody who's very competitive and really wants to kind of not that people who are ambitious and work hard aren't successful, but I think if it's a place where you want to like succeed relative to your peers, I guess I would say that my lab would not be a good place for that because it's really I think it's more of a place where people are working together. And different labs, again, are very different. And there are some cultural differences that are sort of consistent across disciplines. Like I would argue that because biomedical research is often so competitive anyway, you might see some of those labs being more competitive just because they sort of have to be. But a lot of it is just going to be very individual, and you need to experience the lab, talk to the students in there. The students in a lab are a great resource. You need to ask them about what the lab is like when the mentor is not around, like ask them in private and, say, okay, like what's hard here? What are the best things? What could be better and get a good sense of what's going on.
Thank you. And Gavin and Wad, you guys are also welcome to talk about your experiences with finding a lab for this question as well. I wanted to share my experience with that because I started in a wet lab, and this is going off of the point that Maureen, you pointed out, is that figuring out your interests after joining the lab and figuring out what works for you and what your interests are. I was in a wet lab before I went into my psych lab, and I just decided that, maybe I want to try something different. So once you do join a lab, usually they give you a semester to adjust and decide if you like it. So don't feel pressured into staying into a lab now that you've joined and things like that. And I think something else that I was looking into when joining a lab was whether or not there's other undergrads there. It's just like nice to have other undergrads with you and see if they're also being trained well and things like that.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar kind of thing. I first went off interests. And then after that, I think after interviewing, I interviewed at two labs. And I liked the people at Ashley's better. I just felt a little bit better. So I kind of went off interest and then kind of the people in the lab. And then I also asked lots of questions about like, what do you do here as undergrad? Because labs are very different about the responsibilities that undergrads do in those labs. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, Gavin. I think that, different labs just vary so much in terms of how and whether undergrads can get involved. My lab, you can get involved without knowing very much because we have a lot of just basic work. As Wad knows, people new to our lab will like clean snail cups, for instance. Like there's some stuff that you don't need high level training to do. And pretty quickly you'll get involved in stuff that is more sophisticated and such, but there's high variation across labs and like the learning curve that you need to become part of things. So it's very lab dependent and somewhat discipline dependent, but I think it's actually it varies more, I just say, across individual labs, and it's going to be a function of the mentor and the culture and the people there already.
Yeah, before joining the Neiman Lab, I was part of a microbiology / bacteriology lab. So it was very, very analytical. We were just constantly running tests, getting results, preparing to run tests and run the results again. And I did enjoy that. However, I also wanted to try something new and see like what else could I be interested in. And the Neiman Lab, I feel like it has a little bit of everything. One thing I really enjoy doing is outreach. So we'll go out to like the library for after school programs for kids. And we'll just join in on like events that like the rec center downtown. And it's just a lot of involvement with like helping people who might not have constant access to like research or other people to reach out to about with science, especially like younger kids. well, just talk to them about science and get them interested. I remember we recently did like a DNA extraction in strawberries with little kids, and that was really fun. So it's really like exploring your interests.
No, thank you, Wad. And I want to reinforce how important it is to have undergraduates taking part in this outreach. Like it's very powerful for little kids to see a young person doing science, and often a young person, let's say, who's defying some of the stereotypes they might have about scientists, you know. So like Wad is working with them. She's young, she's female, she's Black. Like a lot of times they're like, scientists are old white men. And it's nice to blow open some of those stereotypes and give them a role model that they can think about as they're trying to decide what they want to do for themselves.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, another question people had for you was, what is the best way you can get into a lab with no prior experience?
Mari, you want to go first?
Sure.
Susie?
I'd say send an email. As again, Wad knows, I basically will talk to anybody who's interested in what I want to see from a new applicant. I don't really care what your GPA is. I don't really care what classes you've taken. I don't care what you already know. What I do care about is that you're genuinely curious. You seem like a nice person who's good at getting along in a team, and you're interested in growing and learning. And if you basically fit those criteria, then usually we can find a way to integrate you. There might not be a lot for you to do initially, but we'll encourage people to shadow, to learn and to get involved. I mean, we always need people to do outreach. So there's always ways to get involved one way or the other. So I think what I would say in terms of there's a couple, the question about how to get involved, start emailing people whose labs look like a place that you feel like you might be at home or whose research looks interesting to you, and don't take it personally if you don't hear back. I would say it's like fishing. Just keep throwing a line out there and see what kinds of responses you get.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Maureen, and I will be very specific because I have seen lots of students which has gone through and different experience. And based on my experience, when these days I interview, I look for, if you don't have prior experience, I don't care. But what I need is that you are genuinely interested, like Maureen said, that unless you are motivated for research. And when Gavin interviewed, we had 20 people and 5 interviewed, and we selected Gavin because we saw that he was really motivated to do research. So that was one thing. Second, which I find, I hate when an undergrad come in lab and they are not responsible. I want a responsible person because I don't want to babysit someone. And what I mean by that is that remember that when you're coming to lab, there are people who are going to train you. So they are going to take time out of their busy schedule to spend time with you to teach you. I have seen those excuses, which I thought I will never see. There were few students who they will be never on time. Sometimes they will, excuses I've heard, my bathroom door knob broke and I cannot get out. Next week, my cycle broke, I cannot. So if you're really interested, don't make excuses because in our 4 or 5 decades, we have seen every excuse you can throw at us. So don't just be genuine person which is interested. And that's what we want, that people who are ready to learn. If you do mistake, like in my lab, I say that if you do mistake, it's okay. Everybody learn, but you have to learn from your mistakes, because if you do keep doing same mistake 100 times, then it doesn't look good. So I will just say that research experience is not important, but what is more important for you to be a genuine person, responsible person, curious, like Maureen said. That means that you are motivated towards a goal.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. Our next question's from Lauren. She's asking, what is the time span of a typical research project? And what is the best way to reach out to get involved with labs, which we kind of talked about. So mainly, what is the span of a typical project?
I think what I will say is that, I think Maureen alluded to it, is that first semester, like first time you come to lab, like whatever semester, fall semester, spring, it will take you the whole semester to get used to and even learn the simple basic things. So we don't expect anything from you. After that, if you show a promise as a sort of semi-independent person, then you get your and depend that if you're doing for credit and you have in it, you have learned things fast, then you get your project, I will say, in second year. So most of the time, I want to take a student who is sophomore or junior rather, because it take for us 2 semesters like fall and spring semester to train someone to do something useful. So that's why we generally don't take someone as a senior in the lab, because then by the time we have trained you, it is time for you to go. But that is my personal experience.
I think, Ashu, I think that all makes sense, and it really varies depending on the lab and what you're doing. Like, I agree with the timing. I think the best is we really like to get people in first year, because then they can spend 4 or 5 years in your lab and really learn a lot, come a long way, become very much part of the fabric of the lab. Sophomore, junior year are good too. Let's say that you're doing an honors thesis, which many of my students do. Like, often you have to write a proposal. That'll often happen your junior year or in the summer before your senior year. Then you do the project, maybe your senior year. But even if you start your senior year, I've had students do that. Generally, then you'll just, it still takes a few months to get up to speed, and you'll just be supporting some projects instead of doing your own. But you can still learn and benefit from it. So it really depends, I think, on the lab, on the person. And you're not going to have the same opportunities probably if you start as a senior, but it's still possible that you can get some useful experience as well.
Yeah. And I'll just add a little bit on that. That is individual differences, because some people are very motivated, and you can, as a PI, we can see that who we can give an independent project. Maybe they are in first year, but certain people, even in third year, they will be helping other people because you don't see them running a project by themselves. So I think it varies from individual to individual too.
Yeah, our next question is, what type of research experiences should we seek out? How do we go about publishing and speaking? So kind of like how publishing works, and then different types of research experience you can do as undergrad.
I think you should seek out a research experience where you can get involved in a meaningful way, and where you're not going to like every minute of it, because science is often really boring and hard. But I think where you have fun, you like and respect your colleagues in the lab, you feel respected yourself, and valued. And then I think in terms of writing and publishing, and presenting, tell your mentor that you want to be involved in that way. Tell them that you want an opportunity to present. Tell them that you'd be interested in the potential of a co-authorship. Of course, especially the co-authorship part is going to depend on what you're doing, and whether what you're doing is likely to translate into a publishable kind of role on a paper. It can be hard to predict. But if that is your interest, you should make that clear to your advisor early on, so the two of you can work together to find out a way that you can be involved that is consistent with that happening. In terms of presenting, there's a lot of opportunities for undergraduates to present in like friendly, supportive environments, including here at the University of Iowa. So I would again tell your mentor that you're interested in doing that, and they should be able to help work with you to find opportunities.
Yeah. And I'll just add that you will have lots of opportunities to present. And again, it will depend, like you have to talk to, like Gavin wanted to present and he was working on a project, and that project, even though most of the data was negative, but we presented it. So there are lots of opportunity. For publication, I think you have to understand that you should be working on a project full-time, at least 1 to 2 years before you get a publication quality thing. So even a graduate student in the lab, they don't get a paper unless they have completed 2 years, because it just takes time, and certain area might be more easy. But when you do wet lab experiment, then like animal work, then you have to repeat experiment, and each one experiment run for 3 to 4 months. So in 2 years, most probably you will do 3-4 times. So getting a publication is, if you become part of a project, there are chances that if you join a project when project was already underway. So again, this publication might be different form. If you by publication, you mean a poster presentation, that's easy. Like Maureen said, that you can talk to people and then you can present locally. Or regionally. But if you want a peer-reviewed publication, that's a tall order unless you were part of a project which was going on for some time.
I would say
So,
I think one of the more like probably the highest rate of undergraduate participation that translates into publications, at least in my lab. And this really depends on the specifics of the lab, but the students doing an honors thesis, that's probably the sort of best shot you have at getting a paper because it's a project that you lead yourself and you're working on it for, I agree with Ashi with the time span of it, 1 to 2 years. Like an honors thesis involves 1 to 2 years, and it's usually a standalone project that you're leading. And so that's I think is a good way to get involved if you would like to have that, maybe maximize your chances of being of having a paper where you're an author.
so we are going a bit over time, and I know you guys are busy, so we'll probably just go with 2 or 3 more questions if that's okay with you both.
Yeah.
Awesome. So one is from Kate. She's asking, other than interest, what are other characteristics in applicants that you look for?
I'll let Maureen start this one.
I think that Ashu and I have both mentioned, I think, a lot of the important characteristics. So we both thought curiosity. I liked what Ashu said about being genuine, responsible. He also said that's huge. I would say a good team player, resilient, patient. It's not being smart is great, but I think it's less about being smart and honestly more about a lot of these other personality traits, growth mentality. You have to be able to take some criticism because science is, a lot of things are going to be criticized in ways that should hopefully be constructive and kind. But in science, we improve by, figuring out what we do wrong and trying to make it better, both in writing and as well as in the actual science we do.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree what Maureen said, because we already discussed in one other question that response means first, I tell in my lab people, when you are screening, make sure these people are responsible. I mean, that is the first criteria, because once you are responsible, we can teach things to you because you are there. Well, whenever you said you will be there, that's the first thing. And then other thing, and like Maureen mentioned, everybody is smart because in lab, this is something is that the people you will hang out in those area like med science or med lab or in biology building, everybody is smart who is there. So smartness, we know everybody is smart. What we need is somebody who can also do things like failure, like Maureen mentioned that. And I always say that life in slow lane, because research is not a fast lane. Like you'll do first experiment and you'll publish it. It happens rarely, maybe, but generally most of the time it doesn't happen. So you should be prepared for a grind, because that's what research is.
Awesome. Something to add on to that, when I was searching for research, I had to cold email a lot. And so I really had to draft out my emails in a way that tried to show the characteristics that both Maureen and Ashu are talking about right now. I really tried my best to sound professional, interested in their research. I tried looking at their publications beforehand and asking questions about it in the email. So if anyone here is interested in learning about cold emails, I don't think we'll talk about that today, but if you want to reach out on GroupMe, like I'd be happy to help you guys with that. Our next,
So I think that's one of those things that people often don't know where to start, and it's intimidating. So just seeing an example. And I can't speak for Ashu, but I know I'm always like nice to people who email me, and I'm always willing to at least talk to them. And it takes courage to do that. And that's a good start.
Yeah. And one I will say is that, so lots of time when I will ask all undergrad, which is already in the lab. So I will ask Kevin, or I will ask Leanne or Susil, because they know, because again, we want to build a team, and maybe Maureen is adventurous, but I like to take a safe approach. Like ask undergrad, do you know someone who we can vouch for in the lab? But it's still like Gavin, we didn't know. He just applied for opening we have through this ICRU. I think that's what it is called. And so just, do cold emails, but like, I think most probably they can contact you for cold email and you can tell them. It has to be little personalized. It should not be like I can recognize you, just change the different font in the PI name and everything look different.
Yeah, one thing I would add on to cold emailing is to actually read some of their papers, and talk about some papers that you found interesting, and then also be prepared to talk about that um, in your interview too, if you get an interview, because you can't just take one of the papers and then ask questions about what you're talking about.
Is
Awesome.
that again bring to the same point that you genuinely has to be interested in when you apply for a job that yes, means I want to do research.
So is research considered a job, or is it for credit, or is it mainly volunteering on campus?
It totally varies. In our lab, we have people doing all of these things. Like,
Yeah.
no, I think the mix depends really a lot on the lab, maybe on the department too.
Yeah, I think I will totally say that it is, generally we have for people for credit are hourly basis, and it depend, like you can have those clear conversation. But one thing I try to do, like if I'm taking somebody as a freshman in lab, I don't know how they are going to. So then most probably I will ask them, okay, you're going to do 6 month volunteering or when I say 6 months, I mean the fall semester. And if you have potential, then from the next semester, we can talk about like you want to take it for credit or you want to take it as a paid hourly hour. But it all depend, all of the above, I will say the answer, depending on circumstances.
I do it the exact same way, Ashu. I have people start out as volunteers.
Yeah.
And we see how it goes, if it's a good fit, if they then can, there's a lot of my students are involved in a lot of different programs where you can do research in a lab for pay. I think Wad, you're in one of these programs,
Yeah.
right? Is it?
I'm in ISA, yeah. The
Cool.
Iowa
That's
Science.
great.
Yeah.
So you have to apply for them, and you have to be selected, but there's some really great opportunities to get to have a very nicely structured program where you also get paid and you can also work for credit.
Yeah. I think ISA, I had 2-3 students through ISA too. Yeah.
Okay, and our final question is, how do you balance research and school? So I'd say Gavin and Juan, if you guys want to talk about that as well, please join in. Yeah.
Number one, time management. So just planning out your day of realistically when you have class, and being in communication with your PI or your mentor of when you can actually be in the lab. And then also communicating with your PI if you are more busy during a certain time, or your mentor if you're more busy during a time, and be honest about it. If you have a lot of midterms, or like this summer, I had my MCAT. So I told Ashu that I would be more busy than I usually would be. So that's also one thing to just kind of check with undergrads in the lab. Is the PI really strict on schedules, and working around your school schedules and stuff like that? But yeah, just really just making sure that you're being efficient with your time, and being realistic when you're joining the lab of your time commitment to the lab.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is Google Calendar. That has helped me the most with planning my time and planning around other people's schedules. Just helps me keep on track of everything, and helps me kind of log my research hours as well. Also just reaching out to people in lab and seeing what they have going on, and if I can join in and help, or with the new people that are coming into our lab, seeing like, hey, do you maybe want to try doing this? And I can help you out with learning how to do it, or just kind of like explain it to you. I feel like that's been fun, just helping the new students out. But yeah, it's very heavily time management. That's like the biggest thing.
Yeah. I think I will just attest to what Gavin said, that lots of time, I think that's where undergrad do err on the side, is that they think mentor or PI of the lab as somebody you try to not talk to as much as possible. But I think most probably PI is your best friend. So keep an open communication, and they are very aware of, like, you are also doing a school, you have to take exams. So I will just say, be honest. Like Gavin said, okay, I'm doing this, so we make sure that we made a space. So just talk to them. Let's say that, okay, I have my exam coming, so I might be coming less. So only thing when I say responsible, so we know that the work you were supposed to do, most probably you'll be not able to do this week. So we might have to reassign to those people. Because if you put pressure on yourself when you try to get 30 hours of work in 24 hours, because that is humanly not possible. So just be open about it, talk to them, and people understand. And again, coming back to Gavin what said, that these are the things that when you meet people or meet the PI of the lab, you will get a sense, you should discuss these things in advance.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I want to reinforce that Ashu said is that we know that school should come first. So yes, there's some balancing required if you're going to do both, but like you need to succeed in school. That's why you're there. That's why you're spending a lot of money, is to go to school. And so you should not feel badly about needing to put school first, but it is going to be important if you want to succeed at school and research to make sure that you really are being careful with time management and thoughtful and disciplined.
Awesome. So if anyone here is interested in your guys' research labs, how can they reach out to you guys?
It's
Email.
an email chat, or ask Wad, see what she thinks about working with us.
Yeah.
It's really fun.
And Moesha posted a link to the ICRU website, so that has open research positions. Usually what they'll have you do is just email someone in the lab, expressing your interest. I think on the ICRU website, they should have kind of examples of like what a professional email that you should be writing to a PI is. And then always make sure to look into the research, read some of their papers, see if it's like a good fit. And then your interview, talk to people. And I just wouldn't try to force yourself into a lab that you don't think will work out, but either based on your interests or with you think that you'll get along with the people there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Neiman and Dr. Mangalam, for your time. Appreciate it. And thank you for those
Yeah,
questions.
thanks for inviting us. Good luck to you all.
Thank you so much.
Hope it
Bye.
was